Okay, welcome to our background video for Doubt. I recommend watching this video before you start to read the play so that you have vital information to help you better understand where John Patrick Shanley is coming from, as well as the social environment of the neighborhood that we're going to be reading about. So first, let's talk about the setting of this particular play. The setting, oops, ignore that. The setting is St. Nicholas, which is a Catholic church and school in the Bronx, New York, in 1964. So first I want to talk about where the Bronx is. So this is a map of the whole state of New York, and then we can zoom in to this area, which is where we have Manhattan and the Bronx and all of the other New York City boroughs. So here, this blue part is Manhattan, and that's what people consider to be New York City and where a lot of people with a lot of money live. There are boroughs around Manhattan that a lot of people live in who cannot afford to live in Manhattan. So the Bronx, this red piece, is the borough that this play is set in, and then we're going to be reading about. Yes. Okay, so information about John Patrick Shanley, who is the playwright here. Obviously, his name sounds very Catholic, so there's some background there. And he comes from a working class family. His mother was a telephone operator, and his father was a meat packer. So working class all the way. He is from the Bronx, and he attended Catholic school in the Bronx. This is from his editorial review by Amazon, so I'm going to read a little bit of it to you. He was thrown out of St. Helene's kindergarten, banned from St. Anthony's hot lunch program, and expelled from Cardinal Spellman High School. When asked why he had been treated in this way, he burst into tears and said he had no idea. Then he went into the United States Marines. So this could highlight for, he was, maybe treated unfairly in school or had problems with discipline, which perhaps manifest in this play. He is also a prolific play author as well as a film writer and director, and he directed these two motion pictures. Okay, moving on. So the full title of the play is Doubt, a Parable. So really quickly, I want to talk about what a parable is. And I have this little handy thing from vocabulary.com. So as you can see, ignore emails that come up. As you can see, a parable is a short and simple story that teaches a religious or moral lesson. The parable of the Good Samaritan and the parable of the prodigal son are just two examples of the many parables attributed to Jesus as recorded in the four Gospels. So, a simple short story that teaches some moral, and then Jesus made them famous. Thanks, Jesus. So, some common parables that you might know about are the tortoise and the hare, or the boy who cried wolf. And while these are about specific subjects, like this one features a tortoise and a hare, for example, it teaches a particular lesson that slow and steady is the way to go. While this one is about a boy saying that there's a wolf and there's not really a wolf, it teaches a particular lesson about talking about what you should talk about. If you are not familiar with some of the parables from the Bible, I'll put a link in the description of this video to a video about the Good Samaritan. Let me show you what it looks like. So this is the video. It's super cheesy, but it's just like a cartoon depiction of the parable of the Good Samaritan. So you can become familiar with that because it will be helpful for you to understand doubt. This is not how I want this to look. There we go. Okay, so let's talk for a second about the hierarchy of the Catholic Church. This play takes place within a Catholic church in a Catholic school, so it's important for us to know. The main characters are one priest and two nuns. So as you can see, the way that this thing flows, the Pope is at the top, who leads cardinals, who lead archbishops, who lead bishops, who lead priests. Each priest is assigned to a parish or church where he gives sermons. Something interesting to think about this chart, though, is that there are no nuns on this chart. So where do nuns fall in terms of the hierarchy of the Catholic Church? Well, because they're not even included on this chart, you can infer that they are not valued. Take a second to look at this cartoon and think about what it means. Okay, so the Catholic Church does not allow women to serve in any official positions, whether that be priest or bishop. So there's lots of controversy here, but not necessarily in the play explicitly. Gender is certainly mentioned, so it's important to know this fact and to think about the tension that exists between the nuns and the priests, because the priests have inherent power because they're men, and the nuns are female, so they don't have as much power. Something interesting to note is that technically a nun lives in a monastery and takes sacred vows, while a sister can live and serve in the world and takes simple vows. So there's a difference between who is a nun and who is considered a sister. In doubt, the characters are technically sisters and refer to each other as sister so-and-so. However, nuns use the same moniker as well. Most people don't know the distinction, and most sisters would probably be okay with calling themselves nuns because it's just a common thing to say. So throughout the years, sisters have done a lot in terms of setting up social institutions to address specific social needs. Since first arriving in America nearly 300 years ago, sisters established things like schools, colleges, hospitals, orphanages, homeless shelters, and many other enduring social institutions. As nurses, teachers, and social workers, sisters enter professional ranks decades earlier than most women. I mean, for example, if you think about like hospitals that have some sort of religious undertone, St. Luke's, for example, is, you know, a religious a hospital with a religious founding. So that is interesting. So let's talk about the Bronx for a little bit. Between the 1950s and 1960s, the Bronx saw lots and lots and lots of changes for three main reasons. One, public housing became more common in that area. Two, more reliable highways were built, linking the Bronx with the rest of the city. And three, the automobile became more common and more convenient. So those three factors led to lots of change happening within the neighborhood: public housing, highways, and automobiles. So as such, we saw the neighborhood change, and we saw changing demographics. There was a lot of diversity in the Bronx, and it was incredibly diverse, and sometimes that gave rise to hostility between the different nationalities. Even long after their families had been living in the States. Although to us, all of these groups would now be considered white, they consider themselves distinct when this story takes place. And you'll hear about Sister Aloysius, one of the nuns in the play, talking about some of the tension between there. Also, the quality of life in the Bronx took a sharp decline during the mid-1960s to the mid-1970s. This play, to remind you, was set in 1964, so right at the start of this decline. In addition to a high rate of crime and gangs, the borough was plagued by a wave of arson, the burning of buildings mostly in the South Bronx, because many landlords decided to burn their buildings in an effort to collect insurance money. Interesting. Okay, more about the flavor of the time. I want to talk for a second about integration in schools. So to give you context, the Supreme Court case, Brown versus Board of Education, passed in 1954, and that effectively ended, well, in theory, ended integration in public schools. Our play is taking place in 1964, and it's at a Catholic school. So technically it's a private school. So because they are a private school instead of a public school, they could let anyone in. Keep in mind that some parents might have sent their kids to a Catholic school trying to avoid integration if they were against it. Okay, I want to talk about other trends of the 50s leading into the 60s. Mainly, it was a time of change. There was lots of change happening in things like fashion. There was change happening in music. The school system was set up in the way that we know it now. Change in music, people protesting for the end of integration. We saw families living like this. Lots of change happening. Okay, so one of the characters in the play is named Sister Aloysius. That is Aloysius. Sister Aloysius. I want you to literally say it out loud 3 times so that you know you're saying it correctly. Her name is super interesting. Aloysius is the way that you would pronounce it for a female, but if a boy were named the same name, it would be pronounced differently. It would be Aloysius. So you add the W sound when it's a girl, and there's no W when it's a boy. Aloysius versus Aloysius. It's of Old German origin, and the meaning of Aloysius is famous warrior. So you can see this warrior here. It's the Latin version of Luigi or Louis, and it's also related to Clovis and Ludwig. The name was pretty common in Italy in the Middle Ages, and it was made popular by the 16th century Italian Saint Aloysius, who was the patron saint of students. So think about that. This nun is named Sister Aloysius. There was a famous Aloysius name who was the patron saint of students. Interesting. Also, a famous Aloysius who was a warrior. Think about that. 16 kings of France bore the French form of this name, Louis. Basically, nobody has been named this after 1940, so it's just an interesting name. It's interesting to think about this illusion in terms of our character. Okay, further context. Within this play, there will be allegations of clergyman abuse, so prepare yourself for that and prepare yourself for mature discussions of that. This play was premiered in 2004, but keep in mind it's set in 1964. And while it is sensational that it does deal with some clergyman abuse, it's more of a thriller or a mystery because we're never given an answer as to whether or not the accused is guilty. So you never know by the end of the play, is Father Flynn, who's the accused, guilty, or is he not guilty? So we call this a Pirandellian situation because Lady Justice does not know the answer. Is he guilty? Is he not? We're never given a straight answer. So that is why there is doubt. And it gives us some things to think about. So that's all of the main information that you need to know. Stuff about John Patrick Shanley, stuff about nuns, stuff about the Bronx and its changing demographic, and stuff about integration. Remember to watch the video of the Good Samaritan if you are not familiar with this parable. I'll put this link in the description. That is all. Goodbye.